So to understand different topics, we need to talk about the relevant components for whichever topic it is that we're trying to understand. And very easily, within this arena of what we can call spiritual seeking, we might think it's about understanding physics, for example. We might think it's about understanding consciousness. And when I say understanding, we mean understanding how it works, where it comes from. So there are certain topics that get dragged into spiritual seeking discourses, such as physics. They're there usually not because the topic is about physics, but rather because that can aid the talk about happiness. But if we hear the topic brought in and then we think it's about understanding physics, for example, we can shift off track without even realizing it. Just in the same way as if we think that it's about understanding consciousness. So the reality is that you can talk to neuroscientists, you can talk to computer scientists that are working on artificial intelligence. You can talk to philosophers about what consciousness is, what the human being is. And there are many different models or ideas. I contend that no one knows. You can speak to sages and they'll have an idea, they'll have a concept. A sage or a computer scientist that has an understanding of themselves, or a physicist that has an understanding of themselves. And what I mean by an understanding of themselves means that awareness has landed on, let's say, the sense of self or one's own self-awareness, is likely to give you a better answer, or rather a model that comes from their own experience. But the truth is, our own experience is sort of the outer expression of what's really happening. And so sometimes we think that the sage, the liberated person, has penetrated all the way to the center or the source, and therefore what they say is the truth. And I would say that a sage's model is exactly that. It's a model, and it's a model that is relevant to whatever topic they're talking about, or whatever topic has become a priority for them. And so if you're talking to an artificial intelligence scientist, what they're really trying to do is develop an artificial intelligence. That's a particular objective. A physicist might be trying to understand the nature of matter or dark matter or time and space. In a way, it's a different topic. Well, not in a way, it is a different topic. And so the models that they come up with will be models about that. And so we shouldn't mistake all of these things and put them all in together. And what we especially shouldn't do is think that someone who is self-realized, whatever that means to the person. So if someone says, "Oh, I have realized the self," or understand the nature of reality, or I wouldn't be too quick to jump to the conclusion that the concepts that they're putting forward, what they're saying, is actually correct. What I would say is it's probably very useful information towards a certain topic, towards understanding a certain field. And so these talks the ones that I'm putting forward, are about peace of mind and daily living, which, according to the concept, is the sort of happiness that is available for the human being on an ongoing and unbroken basis. That's from my experience. So I guess it's pretty important to make some statements sometimes so that the audience has a better understanding about why something is said. So we can have a lot of theories about things that we agree with and sound good. So if you're in a field that's quite complex, some people are going to make discoveries, and then they'll explain the theory, and you go, "Oh, I get that. That sounds reasonable." And so you take it on as your theory, and you may not actually know it, other than the theory that someone else has discovered. So really, happiness for the human being is the topic, and I guess I'm talking about what I saw happening for a particular person, myself. So first-hand experience in the process of change. So what is the process of change that I'm talking about? And I'm talking about what we can label as the end of suffering. What does the end of suffering mean? It means that a certain feeling, let's use the word loosely for the time being, a certain feeling, a certain sense of self, that might be better, a certain attitude, a certain accompaniment in life falls away. And that feeling, sense of self, attitude, accompaniment, that component of the life experience in that moment that falls away, I would say, or call an uncomfortableness with oneself. And so when that uncomfortableness with oneself falls away, what we find is that the experience of life and the experience of the person living that life, then, or rather the sense of where that life is being experienced from or lived from, is more or less the same as it was before. So it's still an experience of life on earth. It's still an experience of interhuman relationship. It's still an experience of doing whatever needs to be done according to your circumstance. However, with a different quality to it, or a different coloring, different flavor. So what I mean by different flavor really is, let's call it a bitterness, or more specifically, if we're not going to be metaphorical, the uncomfortableness with what is happening falls away. And so what you're left with is a life experience that by default feels meaningful. Life experience with uncomfortableness in it, and uncomfortableness on the level of the self, meaning the one that is experiencing life. A life experience with that uncomfortableness on the level of self, by default, is not meaningful, is not felt as satisfying or contentful, and there is automatically an intuitive movement towards wanting it to be different. And interestingly enough, the movement towards wanting it to be different is part of the suffering. However, for as long as the intensity of the uncomfortableness remains, there is going to be a wanting for it to be different because of its nature. It is an uncomfortableness with oneself which is inherently unacceptable because it is an uncomfortableness with oneself. And that is a bit of a catch-22. But it's interesting. It tells us that a life with uncomfortableness on the level of self can't actually feel meaningful. There is going to be it is synonymous with a sense of unacceptability and a sense of needing to move away from that. The problem is that we can't ever get away from our sense of self, and so we can't escape it. And then wanting to escape it is more uncomfortableness. And so how that changes is when the sense of self, that is an uncomfortable sense of self, starts to change on its own. And when I say starts to change on its own, it doesn't really just change on its own. It changes because of the journey through life and what that journey happens to be delivering. However, when we look at the journey, we find that the journey isn't something that the individual is in control of. They're on the journey. And so it's a matter of destiny as to whether the journey intensifies the sense of self or starts to diminish it. And as the sense of the self that is inherently uncomfortable starts to diminish, what we find is on the outer level, the resisting the sense of self is the first bit to fall away. But that resisting falls away not because we suddenly are okay with our inherent uncomfortableness, but rather a portion of the sense of self that was previously there has fallen away, and therefore the resistance with the rest of the sense of self falls away. So what we end up with is a change in the intensity of the suffering, really meaning that there is a layer of space or freedom or absence of suffering that gets created in the experience of life. And as the sense of self that creates the suffering continues to change, which effectively means continues to be less there in its way that causes suffering, then the space increases, which really means less and less functions of uncomfortableness happen. And as less and less functions of uncomfortableness happens, the space is freer and freer from uncomfortableness. Now, I talk about the sense of self falling away, and often I've referred to it as the false sense of self, meaning a false idea of who we are. And at the root of that sense of self, that I refer to as the false sense of self for a specific reason, there is an inherent belief system about what it is that we are. And that inherent belief system is based on the deeply ingrained belief in personal doership and a deeply ingrained belief of attachment to outcome. Attachment to outcome really means that we are convinced that in order for life to be better, it's about circumstance improving. And therefore, because we are inherently uncomfortable with the way life feels, and we're convinced that this will get better when circumstance improves, then there is an effort based on the belief that who I am is someone that will one day feel better when circumstance improves. There'll be this inherent movement towards changing life, rearranging all of the pieces of life on the board. And the truth is that rearranging the pieces at best increases the amount of pleasure in life and reduces the amount of pain, which in and of itself is not a bad thing, but it's not going to equate to happiness, which unfortunately the belief in the attachment to outcome part of the sense of self believes it will increase one's happiness, whereas in fact At best, rearranging the pieces will increase the amount of pleasure, which, as I said, is not a bad thing. That is a benefit, but it's a benefit on a different level to happiness. And the other component that is deeply believed is that I am the one in control of how I am. Therefore, I'm the one in control of how I feel about life. So I'm the one in control of this false sense of self, or this sense of self, or the feelings of comfortableness and uncomfortableness. I'm in control of what I think and the outcomes of what I think, and my actions and the outcomes of all of that. So that's the essentially the psychological me that is living life, is this belief that I am the doer and my happiness is to be found in outcomes. Now, this psychological self is essentially the identity, you could say, that experiences life from a particular perspective, from the perspective of the me that includes these set of ideas about itself. And often we talk about the dissolving of the false sense of self. Really, it's about a changing of the sense of self to a sense of self that doesn't include the belief in doership and attachment to outcome. But because the belief in doership and attachment to outcome, especially as it's structured in a way that in a particular form, when that changes, the experience of life feels radically different, because this uncomfortableness isn't there. So it then feels like we are in flow with life. We are not separate from life. The appreciation of the simplicity of life, the simpleness of happiness, the appreciation of the fact that we exist in this world with so many boons gifted to us. All of that becomes available to us in a way that it wasn't before. So there is gratitude, there is appreciation, there is a lack of behavior that is moving us out in directions that just tire us or don't make us, don't align with our preferences. So we end up doing things that we're not really in alignment with. So because that change, when it happens, is so significant, it feels like the sense of self has dissolved. And it's worth talking about it in that manner. The truth is that what remains is still a fairly complex human being. And when we look at what is not there anymore, and that's the focus, if we look at what has fallen away, then we can say, oh, well, my sense of self dissolved. But if we look at what is still there, then we might say, oh, my sense of self changed quite significantly. So in teachings, in even these teachings, I often talk about our true nature. There is a revelation of our true nature. And strictly speaking, that's not entirely accurate. It's the right way to say it in order to help with the change. But what more accurately I would say, but not necessarily better to say, but I'm bring it in for today's talk, is that the idea of who we are changes such that the belief in personal doership and attachment to outcome falls away, which means we don't feel like we are authoring or orchestrating or doing our life. We now start to observe it as a happening, as though I am being lived, a recognition that I've always been lived. Now, what that really means is that the human being is essentially a biological instrument that is very complex and functions in life exactly the way that it's destined to function based on its genes and up-to-date conditioning, which are the two factors, when we look at it, that makes us a particular way in each moment. And all of these features that we are so used to being there, our thinking, our speaking, our feelings, our actions, are really a result, a total result of the very complex biological and psychological makeup. And there's no function in the human being that is exempt from being a result of genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so if that simple fact is understood, then the sense of self has to change, because previously the sense of self included the belief, and the sense of self is essentially a set of, if you take it right back down, it's a set of mathematics. It's the way that the structure is designed for information to flow through, or for energy to flow through in such a way that it is registered as information or signals and causes us to function. Now, from our point of view, it doesn't feel like that at all. From our point of view, it feels like I am making all of this happen, that the speaking is my speaking, that the seeing is my seeing. Whereas what is more likely the case is that there is something that makes all of that happen, and then there is an awareness of it. And it's an awareness of what has happened. And that awareness of what has happened then brings into, or after that, the idea of a me that made it all happen comes in. So the me comes in and claims ownership, in a sense, over everything that is already happening. And so if that me dissolves, the things continue to happen, because the me didn't make them happen. And so the sense of self is entirely dependent on how the system appreciates or misinterprets what's going on, and in particular, its own functioning. So the belief in personal doership is an interpretation, which I've been calling the sense of self, an interpretation of how it is that the human being functions, what causes the human being to function. And the explanation I'm putting forward is the human being functions, and the experience of life that we have, including the peace of mind or the uncomfortableness, is a result of the functioning. And the sense of self is inserted into the final experience of life. And if it's there, and the sense of self includes this belief in personal doership and attachment to outcome, then that means that life is going to be felt as uncomfortable. So that really means that the experience of life is an output, and something gets to experience it. The experience itself, we can say, the experience itself experiences itself. And within the experience, there is the sense of self. And the sense of self can be the sense of me, the doer that requires outcomes, or me, the one being lived who is at peace as long as the non-peace, as long as the suffering isn't present. So they're the two options. An experience of life with a thread of uncomfortableness through it, or an experience of life without that thread of uncomfortableness. And that's destiny. No one doing it. So the seeker can relax, because the seeker is trying to change it. The seeker is the sense of self in the experience that is experiencing itself. If the seeker relaxes, in that moment, there is an experience of an experience that includes a sense of self, but not with the belief in personal doership. And so the experience then doesn't include the struggle to get somewhere. So this notion, you're not the doer, is a notion that can bring about a relaxation. And how does this happen? Not because you, the seeker, do it, but rather the information is received by the system that is functioning, the system that is automatic based on its design, genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so the information is new conditioning that becomes part of the up-to-date conditioning. And it really says, stop and relax. I'm not talking to the biological part of the system, because the biological part of the system isn't going to stop and relax. It is designed to breathe and to function in an environment based on its preferences. But the psychological aspect, the attitude, which is the attitude of doership, so the seeker that says, I really didn't do a good job last year, can fall away. And it falls away as the system receives new information from life, essentially, and life is delivering this information through objects in life. So Roger is just an object, an animate object in life, delivering new conditioning to another animate object in life. And that animate object in life that receives the new conditioning changes because something has hit it. Now, we don't know how the new conditioning will hit it and what changes will happen. However, it's quite possible for this sort of information to hit a three-dimensional animate object in such a way that it then functions differently. And that functioning differently may be what is the absence of the uncomfortableness in the experience of life. So, to me, happiness for the human being really is just the absence of, in practical terms, the attitude of personal doership and attachment to outcome that we can call our attitude towards the circumstance that is happening. Now, they're not really two, they're not separate, they are layers, you could say, of the final singular experience of life that everyone experiences moment to moment to moment. To talk about it as two layers of that experience is important, simply because we're talking about a change that happens, and the change is that one of the components, this layer of suffering, which we can call the attitude to circumstance, falls away. So today I thought, after just a brief talk, I'll open it up to questions and take it from there. Hello, Schumann.
Hello, Roger. Yeah, thank you very much for the talk.
Just 1 minute. We'll turn on the speaker. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. Yes, my question is the sense of self and the sense of doership, like you were talking about, the judgments which can come up, like I should have done it better or things like that. And this was pointed out to me in a discussion that there's a relationship between the sense of self or ego and any form of authority. So we are brought up from childhood with authority, and obviously there's a place for authority as children, especially young children. We need the authority of our parents and things like that. But it stays with us as adults. There's like an immaturity, but because everyone's in the same boat, we don't recognize it. But it's this, it does, I mean, I haven't probably investigated it as much as I should have done, but it just rings through, which is an example of lazy thinking. Sorry, that's not critical thinking, but it does ring true that there's a relationship between the sense of self and sense of self, ego, and authority. I don't know if you would like to comment on that.
Sure. It's linked to our attachment to outcomes. So it's the part of the sense of self or the doer, and the deeply ingrained attachment to outcome, which basically says my happiness is to be found in pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And so parents basically often took or prevented us from having pleasure that we wanted more of. So they didn't necessarily prevent us from having pleasure in a mean or cruel way, but kids wanted to play more, wanted to eat the foods that they wanted to eat, wanted to go to sleep at the time that they want to go to sleep at, all sorts of things. And parents, in their role as parents, had to sort of regulate that. And so whenever someone comes in and tells us that we can't do what we want, they're essentially taking away some pleasure. And if authorities tell you are driving too fast and give you a fine, then that is delivering you pain, and in the form of financial pain. So that's taking some pleasure away from you by essentially taking finances away from you. And so we have this, we take it very personally when pain is delivered through the other, or pleasure is taken away because of what we see as the actions of the other. And so when you look at it, the psychological resistance to authority is because we have a relationship to authority as being those that take things away from us. And so what we're seeing now, for example, in the world is authorities that are telling you, okay, well, you can't go and see your friends. And that's received as a attack on who I am, because they're saying you can't have that pleasure. And then we take that as an attack on who I am, because we believe that we need that pleasure in order to be fulfilled. And so there's a lot of people that don't realize that what is driving their rebellion against what, from another perspective, may be a set of rules or a strategy, essentially, that has been deemed to be the best strategy to combat a certain situation. And that's not to say that that strategy is absolutely right, because the authorities are only human, and new information might mean the strategy has to change. But in principle, we have, let's say, an authority that is telling us this is how we need to behave and need to live in order to deal with this problem. And a lot of people are just seeing that pleasure is being taken away from them. And because there is this attachment to pleasure, the fact that a certain solution is aimed at by introducing certain restrictions becomes irrelevant. And all that is felt is you are attacking who I am. And so in the same way, if someone is speeding and they get a fine, how it's received is this is an attack on who I am. Whereas the truth is, if you're speeding, you are a potential threat to society. And if you were in the other, if you put the shoe on the other foot, you're thankful for rules that will stop people from threatening you by driving, fast in a school zone or whatever, or threatening your children that you love. And so to see this is important, because it then allows us to start questioning whether our reaction is rational or whether it is irrational based on this sense of self that may force us to become defensive in situations that really, when we look at it from a different perspective, would mean we say thank you. So the same thing at airports, checking your bags and what have you, and we take it as a personal insult sometimes, or an attack on my privacy or whatever. And especially if they say, oh, you can't take this sun cream through because it's 200 milliliters instead of 50 milliliters. And the truth is, it's actually there for our protection. And so if we can start to see this, we might have a rationale that starts to cut it off. And as those behaviors are cut off because they're seen, the sense of self that is in place starts to change. If it's not seen and the behavior isn't interfered with, then each time we respond that way, each time we think about the other in that way, we are confirming the sense of self that believes itself to be attacked by pleasure being taken away from it.
I get the sense from what you're saying that the sense of self is also terribly insecure. Like, for example, taking things personally, getting hurt, all of those things. So the question of rationality, it doesn't really come into it. There's probably various levels of hurt. I mean, that's what it seems to me, and from what you're saying as well. There's various levels of hurt. And the other thing, this was the other thing, is also, I mean, that is like having a problem with your authority, but the other side is becoming too dependent on authority, and they might be both even linked, having both a problem and at the same, so you might even depend on a counter authority if you have a problem with the mainstream authorities. But the point is, you need, it's like the sense of self needs these crutches. It can't be detached. It's like linked to pleasure, I suspect, because pleasure is another form of dependency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. That, I mean, that's what you do see, is you either see people rebelling against authority, or people saying, not questioning anything. Now, just because I say that questioning or not questioning is a problem doesn't mean that questioning in the sense where you use your questioning and you assess it incorrectly and then you use that as an excuse to rebel against authority. It's a very fine line that really does require some critical thinking on quite a deep level. So an example of this is, for example, vaccines is this hot topic at the moment. Even if a vaccine seriously, well, let's say even kills your child, and there is no doubt, I think it's probably well understood that without saying vaccines are bad, and I'm not getting into whether they're good or bad, but let's say the doctors that advocate them will acknowledge that some children are going to have adverse reactions to them and may even have, let's say, seizures and die. So even if that happened to your child, that doesn't make vaccines bad. Let's say the number of deaths from vaccines is X, but overall the number of people that don't die because of the vaccine is much higher. Then, and once again, I'm not saying this is the situation. Let's just use it as an example. If the vaccine is overall beneficial, then we can say it's overall beneficial, if it is. Now, to the parents whose child unfortunately died, are they able to hold still that vaccines are not bad things? And that's my standpoint. If I was a parent and my child died because of vaccine, it would be extremely sad, right? The pain will be there. The sadness would be there. My attitude would be that is destiny. That was my destiny for my child to die. If, however, I could, which I suspect I would, because this is how I think, if I could, even in the face of being in an very unfortunate situation, being the unlucky one, still understand that the vaccines overall are positive because of the number of lives saved. Let's just assume this is the case. And remember, I'll say it again, I'm not saying that I'm saying vaccines are good or bad. I'm not even going to get into that discussion. It's not the point of the conversation, because this is a principle that we're talking about here. If I was able to see that they are overall beneficial, I can understand that I was adversely impacted by them, but that doesn't mean I should lose perspective of a bigger picture. And what we tend to do is we look at what is good for me or bad for me, and then project an opinion on the whole based on whether it's good for me or bad for me. And that, unfortunately, is a lack of critical thinking. And so when it comes to looking at the systems in place, we have those people that are rebelling because the system isn't delivering pleasure to them. And then there are those that don't question anything, which means there's no potential to work things out, see life for yourself. So I hope that adds some value to seeing the two extremes of our relationship to authority.
Yes, sorry, it's raised another question. Sorry, I had another question anyway, but but I don't want to get too distracted with the vaccines, except to say I think one of the reasons that some people are very not sure about this. It takes a long time to develop vaccines normally. I think 4 years was the shortest time period for measles. But if a I think what some people fear is not so much the vaccine, but the temptation that it could be used to track people, which is why I think one of the reasons why the tennis player Djokovic has said he wouldn't take the vaccine, that it could be used as a form of identity, because in India, where there can be problems of people stealing people's identity, I think I'm right in saying that they have, or they've pioneered the use of vaccines as a way of also tracking people's identity. And I think people fear that it's under the guise of for people's good. It can also give governments an enormous amount of control in because it can be. I think they fear that it can be part of your passport, which sounds quite legitimate, so that you're not infecting people in other countries, but whether it can also be used to mark your identity. And it's a bit of a conspiracy theory, but the technology exists to see how your body is, how healthy you are and things like that, or if you're undergoing stress. So I think that's what some people fear. But I think it takes a lot of critical thinking as well to assess. I mean, it's critical thinking is is hard work. It's not something that can be glossed over. And the other thing, sorry, I don't know if you want to say anything before I move on.
No, I mean, there's all sorts of arguments as to why people say they're for something or against something. The problem is that these same issues kick into play with their conclusions, and the issues are often based on the belief in personal doership and attachment to outcomes, and then prevents a different way of seeing it from being there. So there's lots of for anyone who is against something, they have their reason. Now, the reason that they have may not actually be very valid. I mean, you listen to some of the reasons, and it just highlights how much scope there is for improvement in human thinking. But that's just the human condition. So we can move on with where you were going.
The other thing was attachment to outcomes, and it's just being brought to my attention that, I mean, I know it sounds in a way obvious, in that I know you don't speak about love so much, but in love, it just seems so obvious that there is no attachment, that there's just no dependency on anything at all. And yet sometimes relationships can be quite messy and it can be linked to love. But the way I see it, it's not the love which is causing the mess. It's always the attachment and the dependency. And it's just recently I did something. I thought I'd better put it into practice. This no attachment and love aren't the same thing. So, in a personal thing, I didn't reply to a text message I was given, but I thought I had to do it because the attachment's not the same as love. I don't know if you'd like to say anything about that.
Yeah, they're completely different. I would say that if a relationship includes attachment to outcome, it isn't a love relationship. An attachment to outcome at times can feel as though it is complete love for the other, whereas the truth is it's complete desire for the other, which really means complete dependency on the other, because you feel that that's what you've missed your whole life. And so it can feel like you absolutely can't go on without the other, which is actually what your sense of self is saying, is this person is exactly what I need in order to be complete. And that can feel very strong at times. And we think that's love, whereas actually it's very likely to be a dependency on the other. And in those relationships, you'll see there's a lot of volatility because the other is not delivering what you want. Your relationship to them, your attitude towards them is they are what will complete me. And as soon as they don't deliver what you want, then you hate them for a while. And so there's a lot of volatility. And if one can see this, then and understand that that isn't love and that that's one's own uncomfortableness, then that's a path to freedom, a freedom from that continuation of that dynamic. However, one of the problems is when we feel like we are so dependent on the other and have those highs and then those lows. It's very scary to think of not being with them. And someone might say you need to be very brave to be able to move away from it. I say it's got nothing to do with bravery. It's an impossibility. You can't move away from it because it's just too scary to think of your life without them. Until the suffering that inevitably is going to be there in the relationship, if it is a dependency relationship, until that gets intense enough, uncomfortable enough, that we simply have to do something about it. So yeah, I'm very much in agreement. If you see that someone's messages have to do with dependency, if there's insecurity in those messages, as soon as you buy into them and respond to them, you're validating their perspective. And so when you step back and say, look, I'm not going to respond to that, it may seem to them like that's an attack on who they are. But actually, that's the kindest thing you can do, because you're saying, I don't see you like that. I don't see you as being dependent on me in the same way you see yourself as being dependent on me. So actually, that's kindness, that's compassion. It won't necessarily be felt like that on the other side, but I think it's compassion to oneself, and because it means you're being clear on who you are, and in knowing yourself, then you know the other. And I think ultimately it's kind to them.
Yes, you're seeing them as they are. Yes. Yes, thank you very much. And I just wanted to say, and it's where there's love, there's just no dependency on anything, on circumstances or anything. I don't want to get carried away with that, because you can get into some kind of euphoria because it's in a way a statement of truth. It can also be misleading once if there's any kind of euphoria. But I get the sense that there can't be any love without total freedom. They're both the same thing.
Yeah, which is, why if it's a love relationship and it stops working, there should be an ease in accepting that it stopped working. There should be an ease in being able to say, in acknowledging what's happening. And so if the other person says, look, my life is going in a different direction, if it's a love relationship, just acknowledging, oh, that's how they feel. And it's not what I want, it's not what makes me feel is going to give me pleasure, but it's life. And so then it's like, oh, well, I respect that. And furthermore, I'm not going to feel like I've lost half of who I am because someone I love has gone off in a different direction. And by default, that's going to be the case, because if you don't know yourself fully, like, or if you don't know yourself to be independent of love of the other, then you can't really love them. So if it is a love relationship, one of the things we'll find is a willingness to allow the relationship to go where it needs to go, without, trying to control it and force it, which really will just perpetuate a lack of flow until the uncomfortableness builds up and it breaks apart.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Roger. Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. See you. Hi, Martin.
Oh, hi, Roger.
Hello.
Yes, very interesting. All the points that you make, it just seems to use an analogy, I think, about a week ago, of the stone that's dropped into a river. It eventually will hit the bottom after realization after realization. And every time I listen to one of your satsangs, there's another piece of information that, if like, expands things and connects together. And yeah, I think you asked somebody, I think it was Luca, 3 or 4 days ago, about, was it a good description, this uncomfortableness with life or in life.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought it was a really good description. And I was thinking about that my uncomfortableness, I've discovered, is actually a feeling of unsafety.
Mm-hmm.
Not feeling safe for as long as I can remember, and that's due to very traumatic pre-birth trauma and birth trauma. And I may have told you before that my identical twin brother was miscarried, and I survived, and obviously he didn't. So there's always this sort of sense of somebody or something being missing. And I now realize that I always felt unsafe if I was on my own. My mum wasn't very well when I was little, and I can remember being left in like cribs and prams and things, and crying, and then just giving up. Like, there's no one coming. I'm probably going to die. And I think this is something I've carried all my life until, obviously, conditions in one's life become really pretty good, or they were for me, and it was, pleasure, occasional pains, but mainly pleasure, even in a hedonist sense. But this feeling of uncomfortableness really is a feeling of unsafety, because it just seems to me as if we're sort of, I don't know, biological conditioning, if you can call it that, is to survive.
Sure.
It's to stay alive, and there are just so many threats or potential threats, that this uncomfortableness for me is a feeling of unsafety, and particularly being alone. If I'm alone, that's as dangerous as it can get. And even at the age of 62, and all your up-to-date conditioning that I have now, it doesn't feel great.
Yeah, that's a good example of how your experience in each moment is something that's produced, and then you get the awareness part of you gets to experience it as it's produced. So the sense of lack of safety is a thread in that tapestry, in the moment, in the production of, or what you get, what we would call your experience of life, has in it that thread of lack of safety. And that was a result of things before. So you're stuck with that until it changes. And so if you can be aware of it when it's there as a component in the experience that you're not creating, right? Because what happened is it wasn't really you that was in those traumatic experiences. It was the biological entity that was in that situation. And so the biological entity has locked away in what we could call the, some of it could be the psychological part of the biological entity. And that's just become part of its structure. And so it produces the experience that includes the lack of safety. And so if attitudinally, when it's there is an attitude from, present day Martin that says, yes, this is my experience of life. And this lack of safety feeling is exactly that. It's a feeling, it's a component of the experience. And to the extent that, let's say, some contemplating, thinking about it, seeing that it's a remnant of an unsafe situation from 62 years ago. And that contemplating of the fact that life is not the same, you're not in the same circumstance as you were 62 years ago, that contemplating may or it may not change it. But you can see that contemplating about why there is this feeling of unsafety or lack of safety, contemplating it is more likely to bring about change of it than, contemplating why popcorn is so interesting to people at movies. And yet, even if you do find contemplating of this sense of lack of safety, that may not change it. And so if it changes, then you can say, oh, wow, that was a result of what came before, so the birth trauma, and then some contemplation that undid that or changed it. And yet we don't know what the contemplation is going to be. I might say something that helps, so that might be part of the subsequent contemplation. And so then we can say, okay, it changed because Roger said something, then my thinking kicked in a certain way, and now I find the lack of safety isn't there anymore. Having said that, I might not say the right things, or I might say the right things and you might not think about it in a way that brings about change. So all of these nuances, what I say is not in my control, it's not in your control. How you then think about it is not in your control and it's not in my control. So that sounds like bad news, but if we get it, then it means that we look at the sense of uncomfortableness as not in my control, a result of things that happened that were not my doing. And if we do start to see the suffering, the pleasure, the pain, all of life as a happening and not my doing, that by default is less uncomfortableness.
Yes, I get that. I really do get that. It's feeling it as well as seeing it, isn't it? It's a knowing of it.
For sure, the feeling of it may be part of it changing, because when you feel it, you might one day you might cry it out, or just cry it and see some more aspects of it in the intensity of the emotion that may come up just by starting to feel it. And so things about it might be seen that wouldn't be seen if you didn't feel it, for example.
Yeah, I get that. It's very interesting what you said the other day about these sort of neural pathways that become set up, when you, from your life experience. And very often, you know, they're described in psychological circles as sort of ego states, aren't they, or parts, you know, that like I think you use the analogy of being left at a bus stop when you're little, and this feeling of abandonment, you know. So that neural pathway is then set up. Oh, if I'm alone at a bus stop, I'm abandoned. There's an uncomfortableness about it, and that then pervades through life. And you know, you could argue that that's, if you like, an incorrect conclusion that you come to. But that incorrect conclusion then sticks with you until you come to the correct conclusion, if you see what I mean. That's very interesting. But it's you know, in my experience, that this thinking, these neural pathways, they exist in other parts. They're not just in the brain. You know, they can be in the heart or the, you know, the guts. You know, there's this old saying, isn't it? I've got a gut feeling about this. This doesn't feel, and that's a if you like, a thinking center, if you can call it that.
Really, these things are just metaphors. Even the neural pathways that I referred to, it's really the overall structure. And so, the structure can be, you know, because it's all interconnected. And then it's even more than just your structure, because your structure is connected to all of life. And when we start looking at quantum physics, there's entanglement theories which say, you know, so we may, and time is not linear. So we don't really know what the cause of the cause of one thing is. We don't know what it is exactly. So when I say it's your neural pathways, that's sort of condensing whatever it is into that metaphor. And it, you know, someone would argue that, you know, if this is all a dream, then your fears are there because in that moment, the dreamer has inserted fears in the dream, and the fear or your words in the dream have nothing to do with any neural pathways, because, you know, the dream character doesn't really have a brain and neural pathways. So even if the dream character was in hospital and the skull was opened up and there was a brain there, that would just be all apparently how it happens. Whereas the truth is, if we're looking at a night dream and there's a fear that the main character has, it's not because of its neural pathway structure. And so that's very valid as well. Someone could say, you know, we don't have neural pathways because life is not what it appears. And I won't really absolutely disagree with that, because the truth is we don't know why this experience is the way it is. But when it comes to happiness in this life, whatever this life is, or just living as the human being, when it comes to happiness, we have to, one of the key points is that how we feel is not my doing. And so if we put it down to neural pathways that were set in place a certain way, whether that's right or wrong absolutely is not so important. What it's showing is that how I feel as a result of structures or systems that I am not the one putting in place. So yeah, that's why I say whatever is said in the teaching is a concept and not the truth. And someone might hear what I'm saying, and which is just a concept, and say, well, this is the way life works because you know, that's what the teaching said. And that's why I try to emphasize what's the point. The point is happiness in daily living. And what we can see for sure is that when the attitude of doership and attachment to outcomes falls away, we feel ourselves differently, and that different way of knowing ourselves is a way of knowing ourselves that is free of this uncomfortableness. And so all the other concepts are there to lead to that change, not to be taken as some sort of absolute truth.
Yeah, I get that. Thank you. That's very, very interesting. Really appreciate doing these things, these satsangs, and really
You're
do
very
appreciate
welcome.
Great help. Thank you very much.
What? But she doesn't have a microphone. Okay. Heidi, if you have a microphone, we'll go, and Holger's up there as well. Yeah. Hi, Holger.
Hello, Roger. I just wanted to thank you for so much peace. And
you are very welcome.
Is it peace of mind in daily living, independent of circumstances?
Yeah.
It just occurred that thinking and feeling is also a circumstance.
Yes, indeed.
Wow, that's quite amazing. I mean, there's so much space in this that I don't need to hook into. I don't need to get entangled in my thinking and feeling.
Yeah, they're all just happenings.
Wonderful. Yay. But still, it's interesting. I feel a deep peace, but at the same time, I also feel my uncomfortableness very raw. But the peace is more important for me. So that's a good pointer.
Yeah, if there's peace and uncomfortableness, it really means that there is no involvement in the part of the experience that is the uncomfortableness. There is just letting it be. And that letting it be is what is the peace part. If you weren't letting the uncomfortableness be, then there would be another layer of uncomfortableness, which probably would be filling up the layer that feels peaceful. So that's very much in line with what you just said, is that if there is suffering there, that too is just part of what is happening, and no need to get involved in it. In fact, not only no need to, but if you do get involved with it, it's just another layer of suffering. Now, that's not saying, Holger, you should not get involved with it. You have to not get involved with it, because we know that Holger will get involved with it if Holger is designed at that moment to get involved with it. And Holger won't get involved with it if Holger is designed not to get involved with it. And so talking about it in this way can be part of what changes our makeup, our design.
Thank you. Yes. God, yes. I had another question in regard to your personal experience or understanding. What is better for reading books or listening to books? Does it make any difference to you? Like audiobooks versus the act of reading, having a book in your hand, and what do you think goes deeper into your system?
From my experience, I read at times, I listened at other times, more in line with the situation. So when I was out walking, I could listen to things, and there were times when I'm walking and I didn't want to read or listen, and then at other times it felt great to have a book and to sit outside and read a book. So I don't think that one is necessarily better than the other, or for some people one suits that person's makeup better than others. But I think if you find yourself motivated to listen to information on an ongoing basis, listen or read, the fact that this new information is there and you're motivated for more of it, that's a great sign. What I would say, that I don't say often enough, but I definitely saw it happening, is that I would recommend listening and reading to the same thing over and over. I mean, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 times, because there's so much detail in there. And as we listen to it again and again, the whole thing comes together in ways that it can't come together the first time that we listen or read something. So, I find myself continually listening to complex things over and over, and as I do that, I will hear what is said differently as the first time has made a difference, and then the second time it's understood better.
So there is a value in exposing yourself to stay in the same namespace. I mean, to stay with the same topic for a longer time, instead to just always hop. I mean, I have this, I observe this in myself. I listen to a satsang of yours, and then I maybe read in another book, and then I read maybe in another book. And so there's always a hopping in a way, instead of just sticking with one thing. So it's kind of, am I just deluding myself by always just hopping on the surface on things, or should I just better stick with one thing and maybe get sick and tired of it, but still stick with it? I don't know.
Not if you get,
because sometimes it's just too much.
Not if you get sick and tired of something, but I think if you find a resonance with something that you feel is the core that you want to, that is sort of the main power source, I think that's a great dynamic that can happen. Shifting around from one thing to another, if you happen to jump from the right, from into related things, then listening to things that are somewhat related can create a contrast and can actually create focus. So I don't think that being exposed to multiple things is inherently troublesome. I think there's some benefits in listening to a range of things, but then you're thinking, then your thinking doesn't bring them together and see where words are being used differently, where the speaker is actually believing or sees things radically different from the other speaker. So seeing where two speakers see things very differently is great, because you can see, okay, so there's two perspectives on something, and then you can see where you resonate with, and you can then unpack it yourself. So yeah, I just keep being lived, Olga. Just do what feels right.
Wonderful. It's such a pleasure meeting you, and I highly benefit from your satsangs and your sharing and your patience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olga. Always nice to have you. Hi, Rula.
Hi, Roger. Do you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me, Roger?
Yes, I can now.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, how are you? Thank you for taking my question. I don't know if you remember me, but we spoke a couple of times. I'm sorry I couldn't be here for the beginning of your talk, so I don't know what the subject was. But I really resonated with, I believe it was Martin who said that he recognized his sense of unease was due to a feeling of fear, of unsafety.
Yep.
All my life, I believe that's the same thing I had, and it caused fear. Basically, that was my main delusion, if you want to call it, or maybe it's anyway. There's no reason externally. My life was great. Just come from a lineage of war-torn people, so man, who knows? But that's besides the point. So I don't know if you remember, but I told you, I raised my hand a couple of times here and there, and then I always put it down because I always feel like I need to figure this out for myself, which is what I've been trying to do. A couple of years ago, I told you I had been meditating a lot, and I had an experience where I saw myself as the light of the world. That's really the way that it appeared to me. And the light of the world was this open space and of the present moment. This was in a nutshell what I realized. And since that time, I stop and just place my attention in that space again. And what ended up happening was in that moment, and then afterwards, whenever I would close my eyes and just place my attention in that, realize that one thing again, it would cause this intensely blissful feeling. And I felt safe there. And I realized I wasn't just this little body who could be hurt, basically. I could sense that I was huge. I was huge. There was nothing that could really touch me. And I always hesitate to ask anybody this because the blissful feeling almost felt like taking a drug, like a physical drug. Like it was really, it was crazy. And I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. So, but then when I met you, and this had been going on for a couple of years, and I started meditating like crazy because this would happen every time I meditated. But when I stopped and I would go do my thing with my kids or whatever, I would forget it, and I would come back to normal. Well, a lot of things changed. My life changed a lot. So it wasn't normal really, and everybody noticed the change. However, it wasn't like a complete, like what you're saying, continuous ease of, I'm sorry, what do you usually say?
Unbroken peace of mind.
That's right. It was not an unbroken peace of mind. And I knew that. But I thought that this was the key. I had found the key and I would just stick with it. And when I talked to you, it was the first time that somebody told me what your teacher told you, which is, it's just an experience. Don't worry about it. That hit me really hard when you told me that. It kind of shocked me and gave me a lot to contemplate, which is what I've been doing all this time. It had the feeling of bliss and all that had receded over 2 years, but I got really kind of a little bit, what do you call it? Like when I heard it's just an experience, I thought I have to contemplate this. And then I felt kind of dejected and wow, this seemed like really something, and it's not, it's just an experience, and I don't have unbroken peace of mind. And then I stopped even meditating. I stopped kind of doing anything, and it's almost like things started reverting back to my old habits, and which I hadn't had in 2 years. It was a miracle. Like my life really miraculously changed. But now I decided to start again, just close my eyes and see if I can sense that same space. And I found it's still here. It never actually went away. I'm still here as this enormous space of light, and usually it's just, I close my eyes and I just perceive whatever sensations, thoughts, feelings without naming them, is the best way I can say it. And my question is, and that blissful feeling still comes, but my question is, I realize now, I do understand that this is just an experience, and I do realize that I do not have unbroken peace of mind in everyday living. My question is, do I continue with this particular meditation that I have, or has found me, or me who isn't here, but you know what I'm saying? Do I continue and see where it leads, or, you know, with the understanding that it is not unbroken peace of mind in everyday living, with that understanding, which I did not have before, which I think is key, because it changed my life so radically. I had such severe depression for many, many years. I couldn't barely take care of my own children. This changed on that one day. This changed radically, and it never came back, but I had have this fear all the time that's just there. It's, you know, sorry, this is very long. I just, I don't know. I guess my question is, do I continue even though I know it's not the unbroken peace of mind?
Yes, I think you should not dismiss it altogether, because it's very much, it potentially is very much part of the process towards unbroken peace of mind. One of the reasons I might say, you know, it's an experience is if the focus is on the bliss, if because then one can think, oh, bliss is what it's all about, and eventually there will be bliss on a continuous basis. Or if there is this dissolving that happens, but it's not daily living, then someone might think that liberation is about that happening and the end of daily living, let's say. So I guess the main reason for saying, you know, be clear on what it is that at least this teaching is saying is available on a continuous, unbroken basis, is the end of suffering. Now, the change that happened is a change of less suffering by the sounds of it. And so that's what I would be focusing on, is the fact that something has changed where there is less suffering. And I would just keep looking at what it is, what is your suffering when that is there? You know, when you can, in particular moments, say, in this moment, I'm not happy. So look at what is there. And my suggestion is you'll find guilt and blame and pride, worry, expectation as these mental movements.
Yes.
You know, looking at the past and feeling regret, or looking at life and feeling a sense of despair or meaninglessness or pointlessness, blaming the other for what they did.
Meaningless
any
is
of those,
the biggest one, yeah.
Yeah. And if you close your eyes when that's happening, and you find yourself knowing yourself differently, and the blame falling away, then that's the methodology that is leading to, you know, the falling away of suffering in practical daily living. Now, at some point, I would think that the dynamic that keeps falling away in those moments that you return back to your spaciousness, at some point, the root of that, the root of the suffering, is going to get sufficiently weakened that that it doesn't arise as frequently in daily living. So the methodology as to how that happens is going to be varied. I would suggest that when you close your eyes, what is really happening is you are no longer seeing yourself as the doer and the one that needs pleasure in order to be complete, and you are knowing yourself as something already content. So if that movement keeps happening, and you realize it is because in that moment you are the identification, the narrative that sees you as the person that is being attacked by circumstance. If you see that that is what is collapsing, then you're seeing that there's more peace of mind, and it coincides with the interference of the narrative that I am, being attacked when circumstances aren't going my way. So it sounds like when you close your eyes and you know yourself as this spacious awareness or the light of the world, you're reconnecting to something that is more fundamental in terms of, let's say, who you are, or the core of who you are.
Yes, that's the feeling, and the feeling is also that the body is not solid. It's a bunch of sensations that are in space, kind of. So that's the main thing why I don't feel unsafe anymore, because there's no little person that can be harmed, essentially. I mean, I don't think it when I'm doing that, but I realize that afterwards. I want to thank you, because I did believe when this first started happening for the first year and a half until I spoke with you that one time, I did believe that this bliss was the unbroken, and that eventually it would be continuous, because it also started happening while I was doing things, sometimes even with other people. So I thought, this is it. And then I want to thank you for making me realize that it wasn't, because I think I would not have been able to move forward without that understanding. So thank you so much, and thank you for everything you do. I'm very, very grateful, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, you're welcome. But keep enjoying the bliss whenever it turns up.
I will. Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, we'll take, let's take one more, I think. Or maybe two more if there's two hands up. Yep.
Heidi.
Hello, Heidi. I was going to say hi, Heidi, but
yes.
No, I said it anyway.
Hi, I'm here. Can you
Yes,
hear
I
me?
can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Hello, Roger. I'm so glad to hear you. Yes, I'm just here because I miss people to talk about all these things. I'm not so long in this area of people who is walking this way. I say it just like that. And
Yes.
I miss more and more in the last 2 years people that can talk about how you are talking about these things. So I'm very glad to be in here now. Yeah.
Great.
It
Yes.
me when
There are
yeah.
there are just not only for you, but also for those people listening. There's a Discord server called Being Lived, I think, which I didn't set up. Someone else has set it up. And then Holger has also got a community, I think, Being Together, maybe.
Great. Yeah.
So if you don't know about those two spaces, I think
Yeah. That's the point.
exist outside of this satsang space anyway.
Yeah.
So yes, go ahead.
So for the moment, I'm well with all what the changes. I go all day. Last time I said to a friend, I have the idea that I'm in contemplation the whole day long, and it amuses me. It's also sometimes very hard, struggling things, all like that. It's just normal life. I work, I do my things, but yeah, I think that this is the point, to have people to talk with them. Thank you for this link from Holger. I will do that, to go more with people like that, because I really miss it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is it's nice to see that it's happening.
Yeah.
Because yes, many seekers
Yeah.
do feel a bit isolated as their way of seeing life changes, and even between teachings, there's differences in the methodology and how the teaching deals with different obstacles. So to find people in the same teaching is particularly useful.
It's so interesting, because I have no idea about the teaching you are talking about. I didn't reach, or didn't, I'm not so good in English. I didn't read something about your teachings. I'm more in the way where I like to go without teachings, just to stay in what is. What do you think about that? Is it possible to go this way without teachings, or is it necessary to have a teaching?
Well, you see, even the concept of what is was delivered. Let's say, I guess, usually it's, if someone bumps into what is, it's because a teaching has said, listen, stop labeling everything and thinking it is the way that you think of the universe. Maybe it's not at all like that, and freedom is from just allowing everything to be what is and being one with that, which really means stop thinking, stop believing, and just be. Now that's a teaching.
Yes.
That's a concept that was delivered, and it made sense, it was understood, and then there was a bit of experimenting with that, or contemplating what does it mean. And then maybe you found a falling away of thinking, and there was just a being with life. And sometimes we don't appreciate that is a teaching, and often a teaching can actually say it's not a teaching as part of the teaching. They'll say, what I'm saying is not a teaching, there is no teacher and there is no student, for example. So then we say, I don't listen to teachings because teachings are telling me to do something or whatever. And then, whereas this that I heard, it's not a teaching, because it says this isn't a teaching and there is no teacher and there is no student. Everything is one, for example, and thinking that there is a teaching and thinking that you are a student and you have to understand the teaching and is more of the problem. And yet that explanation in itself is a teaching. So the truth is we probably are exposed to teachings, and because that is how we tend to get the food for thought that then maybe develops into something obviously beyond the teaching, which is what a teaching is always aimed at doing. Now, sure, we can, let's say we're not exposed to any teachings, we have no books, we don't listen to any talks, don't watch any videos, and it's just our own contemplation based on our own life experience. That can happen, but it's going to be much slower probably. The benefit is that people in the past have put their experience, their insights down in the form of teachings and pointers, And so then we get this concentrated body of knowledge, essentially. And it's like we don't have to go through all of that work in the same way that someone else did when they didn't have a teaching. Doesn't mean we don't have to do work, because the teaching has to become understood for ourselves. But I think teachings are very, very, very helpful in allowing things to unfold much, much quicker, really, than if we didn't have the teachings.
So can I understand your talkings, your daily life talkings, as a teaching?
Yes, I would say they're very much a teaching.
Okay.
Not that, but that's because I think anything like, so I make it very clear that these are concepts, and they are concepts that are designed with an understanding of what needs to change, and so the concepts are there specifically aimed at bringing about a particular change. So yes, I think I would call them a teaching.
Okay, so yes, in my case it works. I can say just like this, because if I am listening to you, so there are some openings and new spaces day by day, and for that I think it is a teaching that helps me also, as you said, to go in my way.
That's the best way.
Not to do all the things others did, because it's not possible to do it like others did it. Yeah, I understand.
Yes.
Great,
Yes.
great, yeah. And I think also for me it's really important to have the possibility again to talk with people that go the same way, to open these rooms, because I sometimes I make this experience if I talk with people that tell to me, what are you thinking about? I cannot understand your talking. And then sometimes one or the other is by the time asking, tell me more about that, and then it opens the same room where they also can understand. But then I feel a strength. Sometimes it's hard to talk about with people that have no idea about. And sometimes I just need a little bit Erholung, some calm, some refreshing in talking with people like you or others. And I like to go on with that. And thank you so much for giving me this possibility. It's great.
Yeah, you're welcome. When things in the world return to a traveling environment again, then I look forward to turning up in your part of the world as well. It sounds like you're from Amsterdam or from Holland anyway. So hopefully I'll make it to Europe, and there are the retreats here in Australia. So for those that really want to get in with a group of people in person, some of the retreats are beautiful spaces where people make good friendships, and I'm always impressed that, especially the 3-week retreats.
Okay.
At,
Yeah, I'm instead I'm living in Baden-Baden, near Stuttgart, Köln, Germany, like this. And yes, if you once are in the region, I think I will hear about, and then I can choose that also, to be in space together with people.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I got that wrong. So you're from Germany, not Holland. Oh well.
Yeah, it's
Not too
not a
far
big,
away.
not a very big space.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah,
All right.
Australia is too far. Australia is too far away from me. But
You'll be here by tomorrow.
I have a look. I work tomorrow, but maybe it's possible to step in during my work. I will see. Yeah.
All right, very good. Nice, nice talking to you.
Yeah, it's very nice to meet you. Thank you so much, and good time. I will hear you again, and the others also. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Goodbye. I think there was one other hand, so... Hi, Porno.
Hello, Roger. It's so good to see you.
Nice to see you again.
So my question is, what exactly is Kundalini, and is it required for liberation?
Well, I think we have some feedback. Well, let's see if it... if you turn my sound off, it will help.
Okay. I just mute
On,
myself.
yeah, well, so I'm not... my journey included what I would say is some Kundalini movements. And, you know, Kundalini essentially, as I understand it, is an energy that moves through the body, is part of the body system, the body energy system. And that energy system can get blocked. It does get blocked with the beliefs about who we are and our perception of life, the fears, the desires. And generally speaking, there are energy centers, 7 or 8 of them, depending on which view. I mean, it could be 19 or 14, 7, 8. But let's say these energy centers are centers that are responsible for different areas of our life, let's say. And so the first chakra, which is this energy center, is linked with sexuality and survival. And so if that is blocked, it means there are, you know, the identity on that level, the false sense of identity on that level is blocking the chakra, and so there'll be certain fears and certain desires, and an awakening of the Kundalini energy, which is often very linked to new ideas, spiritual ideas coming in, spiritual concepts coming in that open us up by challenging existing beliefs. So when new information comes in, it can start to open up the blockages. And as the blockages open up, the energy starts to flow through the system more freely. The system starts to rebalance itself. And as it rebalances itself, then pressure comes up against different blocks. And those blocks then come into focus. And in time, those blocks get loosened up. And there is said to be this Kundalini energy that, when it's awakened, does a lot of the rebalancing, does a lot of the unblocking, is the wisdom that knows what needs to happen next, all on an energetic level. And when this starts happening, the seekers can report visions, they can report pains in the body and ecstatic feelings. It's really, I guess, a journey in and of itself. And so, because there are many paths to the one place, Kundalini could be said to be, it is its own spiritual path. And often someone's path can include a bit of, bhakti, a bit of Kundalini, or a bit of jnana and a bit of Kundalini, or mostly jnana and some Kundalini, which is just the specific makeup of that person's journey, that person's destiny. So Ramana's Ramana's journey started when he was 16 years old, and he had a Kundalini experience in his family home where his body was convulsing, and obviously that was a very significant part of his change. And after that happened, he had a vision of Arunachalam and was driven to get on a train and found himself in Tiruvannamalai, where he recognized the mountain and recognized it as his guru. And then his journey continued on. So clearly Ramana's journey included devotion, so it was a path of bhakti and jnana and kundalini. So, you know, it's if your path is a kundalini path, then it's probably necessary for you to have a kundalini master or a guru that is familiar with that path. However, if kundalini comes in as a support to your main teaching or the main path, then what I would advise is, in a way, to surrender and allow it to do its work. And because it's often undoing energetic blocks in the system, it can feel, you know, the reports are quite violent. Some people say it's really ripping through things, and then someone else's journey is likely to be completely different. And you know, someone will report a kundalini path that was, you know, easy and gentle. So if you have more specific questions, I'm probably not so qualified to answer them.
No, this really puts things in perspective. Really helpful. So another one I'd like to ask, like, how is the path really decided of one to be a householder or to be outrightly a sannyasi?
Well, that comes down to your... Sorry, what was the question again exactly? How do you decide?
How is the path chosen? Like, am I the one choosing it? Like, if my choice is to be a householder or to be a sannyasi, or is that also predestined how it is going to unfold?
Yes, I would say, I mean, the way I see it, all of life is unfolding and predestined to unfold that way. So someone's path unfolds, it happens to them, really. It might happen in such a way that it feels like they decided, but the truth is that the fact that they found themselves at crossroads of picking one way or the other was in itself part of their destiny. And then what they picked at that crossroad may, from one perspective, seem like their choice, and from one perspective it is their choice, but that choice was inevitable. And based on factors that made that choice the option to be picked. So Nisargadatta made it clear, or was it even, I think it was Nisargadatta's guru, made it clear to him that he was a householder. And so I think Nisargadatta had left his family to be a sannyasin, or to be a almost like a sadhu maybe. And at some point he was told that he was to go back, and that he was a householder, and being a householder isn't an obstacle to seeking. That in fact, you know, seeking is happiness in daily living. And if your destiny is to be, your daily living is to be a householder, a parent, a child, someone going to work, none of that is incompatible with spiritual seeking, because it comes down to your attitude to life. And so it's about recognizing, okay, my destiny, my circumstance is to be a husband or a wife or a parent or a child or a employee or an employer. And it's about my attitude to my life, which is whatever your life happens to be.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I think we lost the connection there, but I think for now we will call it a day and be back tomorrow.